Hi everybody, my name is Dr. Nadina Khala, and welcome to my lecture, Emerging Technologies for Urban Forestry. Applying technologies for urban forestry and urban ecosystems as a whole has been a huge passion of mine and luckily my job for the past several years. I conceptualized the concept Internet of Nature in 2018. And in 2018, I felt that after seeing the trends that we saw in green cities and the trends in smart cities, I felt like there was not enough being done to bridge these two together. In fact, there was so many interesting technologies being applied to the areas of mobility, waste management, even our lighting systems, how we get around our systems, even how we order our groceries, how we vote, how we deal with our healthcare, all of these different aspects. I felt like, why is ecology being left behind from the digital revolution? That was something that I wanted to change. And I've done that by conceptualizing this concept of Internet of Nature. And Internet of Nature is the framework for being able to apply emerging technologies to map, monitor, and ultimately reconnect people to urban ecosystems. Now, I spread the word about Internet of Nature through my research practice, through teaching my students, through a podcast, and through keynote speeches and a forthcoming book. And today, what I want to take you through is essentially some of the most cutting edge examples of how we can use emerging technologies specifically for the field of urban forestry. Now, urban forestry is something that's always been very near and dear to me. I got my PhD in something called ecological engineering, which is essentially exactly what it sounds like, combining ecology and engineering, in my case technology, to essentially build and design and create spaces, ecosystems for both people and nature. And when we talk about urban ecosystems specifically, trees and urban forests are undoubtedly one of the most conspicuous elements of that ecosystem. And that is why it's so important to not only properly manage our trees, but also be very intentional about where we plant them and how we go about treating them throughout the duration of their lifespan. I want to take you through the first example, and that is the terrestrial LiDAR-based mobile mapping to automatically detect trees. Tree inventories are an essential part of an urban forest master plan. An urban forest master plan is absolutely critical to being able to understand which trees are where, so that you can essentially understand what you need to do when. And a traditional tree inventory, when done manually, can take a lot of time, typically sometimes up to a decade if you're looking at, huge cities that have millions and hundreds of thousands of trees. So by the time that you've mapped the first tree, that data is already really quickly out of date. Essentially what terrestrial LiDAR allows us to do is, LiDAR, for those of you that don't know, is a technology that works very similar to radar or like a dolphin's echolocation. Essentially, LiDAR sends out a laser and it immediately counteracts whenever it hits something on a very fine scale. And essentially what you get is you get a 3D model of everything that's happening around you. And when you do this from a mobile mapping approach, for example, putting a LiDAR scanner on top of a car, you essentially get a 3D model of everything that's around you. There's a company in Amsterdam called Tree Tracker. And what Tree Tracker has done is it's created an algorithm to essentially mask out everything that's not a tree. And what you're left with is a 3D model of all the trees in your surroundings. And that can be incredibly helpful to understand the location of the tree, the condition of the tree, the crown volume, the diameter of the trunk. These are things that, and I know this from doing it in the past, you have to guesstimate. You have to do your best to basically observe these things in the field. And being able to use this technology offers us a way to get that data much more frequently and also at a much higher granularity and perhaps even at a much higher accuracy as well. Now, that can be interesting for being able to understand which tree is where, being able to optimize your management of an urban forest, which of course is part of an overall sustainable city. But one of the things that we are structurally undervaluing is the benefits that urban forests offer us. There are software programs that help us do this. So there's a software program called iTree. iTree was developed by the USDA Forest Service. And essentially what it does is it takes the values, or let me put that a different way. It takes the ecosystem services that a tree might offer, like, for example, how much oxygen it produces, or how much stormwater it filters, or how much carbon it sequesters, or how many air pollutants it filters. It takes all of these things and essentially it assigns that service that tree does a monetary value. Now, this iTree software can be incredibly effective for understanding things like, what is the value of trees? If I remove trees in this development, what value am I going to lose? Those are incredibly important answers to have, especially when it comes to building and shaping and planning the cities of the future. But the problem with a software like iTree is essentially it's a model and it's a bit of a black box, and your output is only as good as your input. But if we can drastically, radically increase the accuracy of that input, that's going to mean that we have much better iTree output, ultimately meaning that we'll be able to make much better estimations of what each and every single tree in that urban forest does for us. How much stormwater does it filter? How many air pollutants does it filter? How much stormwater does it intercept? How much carbon does it sequester? If we can hang a dollar value on these ecosystem services, we're going to be able to have a much easier job at at understanding what this means for policy implications and shaping the systems, the ecosystems of the future. Now, a second technology is an interesting one. It provides you essentially with a way to communicate with trees. And that technology is a very, very simple one. In fact, it's an email address. Several years ago, the city of Melbourne had a problem. They were losing several of their trees to drought. Now, this was, of course, a huge frustration, not only for the city government, but for Melburnians as well. They had a lot of questions about individual trees. For example, when are you going to look at this tree? This tree looks sick. This tree looks unsafe. When are you going to replace it? When are you going to save this tree? When are you going to come take a look at it? Citizens, understandably so, had a lot of questions, and the Melbourne's department, their office of urban ecology and urban forestry, wanted to help their citizens as best as possible, but they only had one central email address, which was incredibly frustrating to try and understand which question went where. So essentially what they did is they offered a way to they assigned an email address to each and every single tree to basically streamline that process. But what happened next completely took people off guard. They actually ended up writing these trees emails, love letters, song lyrics, poetry, all of these different things to express their love and their appreciation for trees. So what was initially meant as a technology to help inform the management of these trees actually turned into a way for people actually to express their love and appreciation for trees. And I love this example because it just shows that intrinsic love and want and innate desire to be with nature and to be amongst trees was already there. Technology just needed to bring it out. I got the opportunity to be able to understand what the power of so-called talking trees could mean this past summer when I was one of few lucky ones to actually be at the premiere of the Giants of North, and a geofencing basically located audio tour of trees, talking trees in Amsterdam. I didn't do a good job at explaining that. So essentially what I mean is, in a traditional audio tour, you would have to scan a QR code and it would start talking to you, right? Now, what Buck van Dijk, the founder of this project called Giants of North, or Reuzen van Noord in Dutch, what she wanted to do is she wanted to bring to light a lot of the stories around gentrification, changing neighborhoods, post-industrial neighborhood development, what that meant for the original inhabitants of the neighborhood of Amsterdam North. Those original inhabitants weren't the people, they were in fact the trees. And she felt like being able to create these talking trees would provide people with a different mindset essentially when they pass these trees, because Amsterdam North, despite it having a lot of these big, beautiful, mature trees, is also the district in Amsterdam which is losing the most trees. Now, here I am in this slide enjoying this audio tour with my family, and essentially how this works is it was quite different. It was, of course, enabled by technology, but the point was not to be distracted by technology, that you could be fully immersed in this audio tour. So the idea is that it worked essentially using a technology called geofencing. And what happened is you would scan the tour at the beginning, and you would essentially have your headphones on. You'd put your phone away once you press play, and from there you would be taken on this 1.5-hour walking tour of all these different trees that were talking to you. So you would have, based on your GPS location, it would know where you are on the tour, and you would get different audio cues to essentially be able to direct you in terms of which way to walk and which trees to stop at and which trees had a story. And it was incredibly impressive. And I mean, I was already a tree lover, but to be able to experience this, I can tell you, I will never, ever, ever look at these trees in the same way again. It was an incredibly powerful way of using technology to facilitate a lot of these different feelings, this innate love that we have for nature around us. Now, second to last example that I want to share is this idea of building empathy. And I think that is such an important part of being able to understand what nature means to us, that nearby nature, that nature at our doorstep means to us, and what we need to do to ensure that we are taking the best care of it. And one of the ways to ensure that we're taking the best care of it is to ensure that we get people on board, that we get that buy-in. And that can be a difficult thing to do in the city. Most children that are growing up in cities today do not have a lot of so-called nature exposure. And I think, how can we possibly believe that we are going to be raising the next generation of environmental stewards if we do not provide children and adolescents with the opportunity to experience that wonder in nature and that understanding of nature? And I truly believe, and there's research also to back this up, the more understanding you have, the more empathy you are going to feel, and the more likely you are to actually protect that thing that you feel empathy for, which in this case is urban nature. Now, there is, when it comes to building empathy, again, it's based on that understanding. And one of the technologies I'm most excited about in this space is the use of flora and fauna identification apps. So I want to hone in on Seek for a minute here. Seek is the app developed by iNaturalist, a global citizen science community that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And essentially what Seek does is it uses artificial intelligence and computer vision, to be specific, to essentially be able to identify many, not every, but getting there, species of plants, mushrooms, trees, flowers, snails, turtles, squirrels, if you're fast enough to get one on camera, all of these different kind of species, different marine species, all of these different species and across these different kingdoms, essentially be able to identify them. And what that does is twofold. On the one hand, we are building towards that creation of empathy. So Seek, this app by iNaturalist, is used often in scavenger hunts with children in cities. And in fact, it's actually used as part of the City Nature Challenge, which is a core challenge that iNaturalist, the community around it, puts on every single year in the last weekend of April. So it's coming up. And essentially what it does is it encourages citizens to go out and document as much wildlife as they can in a short amount of time. And essentially what this does is, yes, we're building empathy. We're creating these experiences where people can go out in nature and understand and learn about it. But at the same time, every single time one of those photos is taken, we are essentially creating a geotagged moment in time of that species. And that in turn is creating arguably the world's largest biodiversity big database. And that big data, that biodiversity big data, is exactly the kind of data that we need to be able to answer some of the most pressing issues that we have around the effects of climate change in our cities. It can help us answer questions like, Which species is going extinct where? Which species of flower are blooming earlier than other species? Which invasive species have popped up and which species have perhaps got away? Which species have been conservation successes and which ones have been failures? We have a lot of big questions when it comes to climate change and its impact on the wildlife in cities, and this kind of data can help us get there and allow us to crowdsource it in an effective and scalable way while engaging and educating the public. Now, the last example I want to take you through is the use of high-resolution satellite imagery and a whole host of other different technologies that are in this space. Now, we know now that nature is medicine. In fact, there are some 1,000 peer-reviewed articles that back up this link between being out in nature and having a positive, materially profound impact on our human health and well-being on a physiological level, on a psychological level, and on a cardiovascular level. There is an incredible amount of benefits that being out in nature offers us. In fact, it's been so well recognized that there are now programs which actually prescribe nature to patients. So patients that are dealing with obesity, anxiety, depression, whatever it might be, there are actually programs now which prescribe nature to these patients. In the Netherlands, we have a program called Natuur op Recept, which literally means nature prescription. And in the States, you have the Prescription for Parks program. And these are incredible programs, but, is it not medical malpractice to then just say, go out into nature, 30 minutes twice a week? A doctor would never prescribed you a bottle of pills and said, take one when you feel like it. That's not how medicine works. So we need to do a better job at deciphering what it is exactly on an individual level, because the future of medicine is personalized. On an individual level, what is the dose of nature that people need? There's a company out of Oregon in the US called NatureQuant that I recently started working with. And NatureQuant, essentially what they've done is they have gone ahead and they've combined Google Street View, tree data, satellite imagery, aerial imagery, drone imagery, LiDAR imagery, which we discussed at the top of the lecture, and all these different data sources, whether that's air pollution, light pollution, noise pollution, all these different data sources, essentially to combine them and come up with what's known as a nature score. And based on that nature score, using your GPS location, the Nature Dose app can actually track your aggregated time inside, outside, and how much time of that you've been exposed to nature. Now that is an absolute technological breakthrough, because what that means is and we're in the midst of different clinical trials right now, we are going to be able to essentially have direct correlations between time outside, time exposed to nature, your nature dose, and all these different biomarkers that we're tracking. And ultimately, what I hope that this leads to is that we're going to be having health insurers and fitness apps. They already provide you rewards based on your steps and your heart rate and your healthy habits. What if they could provide you rewards based on time that you were exposed to nature? What would that mean to democratize access to nature? What would that mean for the business case of nature? What would that mean in terms of creating equitable, natural areas that are going to be accessible to people as a public health intervention? It's going to completely mainstream nature. And one of the things that I hope that it leads to is that, if everyone's familiar with the Apple Watch, you have these 3 different rings. What if 1 hour in the park per day could be the new 10,000 steps? What would our world look like if people en masse were prioritizing being in nature and accessing nature every single day? What would that society look like? Those are big questions, but these are exactly the kind of things that the use of emerging technologies in this space brings to light. And that's why I'm thrilled that I was able to share just a couple of the different examples that the Internet of Nature could mean in your studies, in your work, in your practice. And if you're at all interested in exploring more of them, please feel free to reach out to me. I would love to continue the discussion, both on my socials, and if you really want to dive in, I also have a podcast called the Internet of Nature podcast, in which I go through many of these examples as well and really kind of dive into some of the origin stories behind a lot of these entrepreneurs and innovators. So with that, all the very best, and thank you for listening to my story.